Your passion for data and just your like enthusiasm is so infectious. You just absolutely love it. And it might seem, as you said, like maybe a bit like dry, or people don't really maybe understand what working with data, being in a data analytics job is. But increasingly now we're seeing those types of job be really important in a lot of companies. So what does a typical data analytics role look like?
For me, I think it does come back to storytelling. And I think where you get the really great data professionals is where they remember that and they know that. I think it can be really easy to get involved and bogged down in the technical solutions. And I'm sure some technical people would want to come to speak to me and talk about how the storytelling is someone else's role. But I think if we can always keep track of what is the context of the data that we're trying to process, that we're trying to analyze, that we're trying to, maybe do some predictions with, then we can get the most out of it. Because sometimes you can be just churning away at building something, doing something with data. But if you don't have that context, then you don't know for sure that you're actually doing the right manipulation or storytelling with it. So yeah, a typical kind of data role, I guess, could be something where you're taking different bits of information from multiple places in some instances, moving it through and trying to manipulate it so that you can get something that's more maybe summarizable, so that you can tell other people, hey, look, this is what I found within here. So that's fairly vague and broad, high level, but I think it obviously depends on which sector you're in. If you're doing something like e-commerce, you're wanting to understand what sales have you had, what stock have you got, who's coming to your website, where are they coming from, and then what is actually being sold and what's going on. You might then also look at seasonality and all these different things. But for me, the way that I see that is just different forms of storytelling.
The first time I saw you speaking about data was on a marketing meetup webinar, which was really good. And you were talking about dashboards and having the right type of dashboards to tell your story. So obviously data can be quite overwhelming at times, especially when you have a lot of it and you're trying to tell the story using data. So what are some really important things you can do to not get super overwhelmed in all the numbers and try and create a really concise and effective story using data?
Yeah, so I think having that story or the context that you're trying to tell just somewhere nearby, sometimes that just means having it on a post-it or whatever kind of digital workspace you're working in. But then to use that as your anchor. And then what I would do is say, okay, we're trying to tell this story on how many sales have we had on this e-commerce website, but knowing then that actually there's so much data available to us, and maybe writing all of that stuff down, again, digital or otherwise, whichever way your brain works best, so that you can just see it all and then start to say, okay, what are the components that I actually need here? And this will work differently for different learning types and different approaches and different kind of communication styles that different people have, which is brilliant, because that's where it's really useful to work in a team, because you can get some complementary skills too. But it's about taking that anchor, understanding what's available to you, reducing it down then to something slightly smaller, and then saying, okay, let's come back up to our anchor here and say, okay, how do we bring that story in? And that can work as a methodology, whether you've got something that you need to send out by the end of the day, and it's worth just spending 15 minutes and just throwing everything down and seeing what's happening. It can work also when you've got a project that's 6 months long and you're building like a much bigger, comprehensive kind of suite of dashboards for a massive company that might have tens, maybe hundreds of systems, or a much smaller company over here that just has 3 or 4 systems. Like the approach is still the same. It's just the timeframes that are slightly different.